Imagine superstar wide receiver Ryan Williams for Alabama and superstar wide receiver Jeremiah Smith for Ohio State. Imagine those two on the Georgia Bulldogs. Apparently, that was up in the air. Georgia recruited both Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith pretty heavily. Didn't land either of them. They end up landing some other pass catchers in that class. We'll get to that, but they were interviewed recently, just talking about what their relationship was like, what their recruitment was like, as both of them are on the cover for the next college football video game that's going to release in July. Ryan Williams said that while they were on a visit to Georgia, that he was trying to convince Jeremiah Smith to team up with him, that they should go and team up together and be on the same squad. Now, they didn't necessarily specify whether or not they were going to try to team up at Georgia, but they were on that Georgia visit. Georgia is one of the premier programs in the country that lands a lot of recruits. Now, isn't typically elite at landing elite wide receivers. That's not really Georgia's MO. They've been really good at recruiting linebackers, tight ends, the trenches. For the most part, running backs, right? Wide receivers not typically the position that the Dogs get right every time. And look, Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith are absolute game changers, but let's talk about what that would look like a little bit. So we'll get a little bit hypothetical with it. Talk about, does Georgia really need that? I think we've talked about this a lot with wide receivers, because ultimately not landing one of those guys causes a little bit of a trickle effect for Georgia that leads us to what the Bulldogs roster in the wide receiver position looks like here heading into the 2025 season. It would be sick. All right, I've got much to say about these guys, and I've got much to say about this topic. So let's have fun with this one. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post talking about Ryan Williams, Georgia fans' nightmare from that one game. Jeremiah Smith, the Georgia wide receivers. Look, in 2024, Georgia had a wide receiver problem, right? Famously led the country in drop passes at that position. I think the number was 36. Didn't have a go-to guy. There wasn't one. Arian Smith ended up leading Georgia in yards, and part of that is just because of his big play ability down the field. And Arian Smith, Carson Beck, they left yards on the table as a duo, right? Passing and downfield. Dominic Lovett didn't really perform the way I think people thought that he would after he was brought in from Missouri. Georgia loses Ra Thomas to off-the-field issues. Georgia loses Colby Young to off-the-field issues. They don't really have trustworthy freshmen in that 2024 class. Well, first of all, if they landed one of the 5 stars in Ryan Williams or Jeremiah Smith, they would have been starting. They would have been out there anyway because of that's how talented they are. But it shows when they didn't have a Ladd McConkey out there. They didn't have a Brock Bowers. Elite playmakers that are going to be NFL stars, right? They kind of already are. That's what Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith are. And Georgia needs that. They need that. And that's how, not landing those guys kind of turns into a trickle effect of what their wide receiver room looks like now. Which is, hey, they brought in some freshmen that are better in this class, you'd think, in Taylor Taylor, C.J. Wiley, Landon Rolden. I was blanking on the other 4-stars. So they brought in some freshmen that are supposed to be pretty good. Taylor Taylor specifically is someone they think could potentially contribute immediately. They go to the transfer portal and they say, hey, let's go get a star in Zachariah Branch. Let's go get a star talent. Let's go get a big-time target in Noah Thomas out of Texas A&M. They get Colby Young back, and then all of a sudden now Georgia's wide receiver room looks like it's in pretty good shape compared to what it was. And part of that is not landing these elite receivers. They're going out and getting the transfer portal. London Humphreys, Colby Young, Zachariah Branch, Noah Thomas. Those are 4 of their top 5 or 6 receivers heading into this season, and they are all transfer portal players. Georgia is not recruiting this position at an elite level and not getting it right, at least. And even before, Dominic Lovett was a transfer. Ra Thomas was a transfer wide receiver. Right, Dylan Bell is going to be Georgia's pretty much, and that depends on what you get out of Sokovie White, depends on what you get out of Jeremy Bell and the freshman. But Dylan Bell is going to be Georgia's only top receiver that has been at Georgia for his entire career. In that 2024 class, Georgia does not land one of the big-time wide receivers. Jeremiah Smith, Cam Coleman, Ryan Williams, TJ Moore, Micah Hudson, Ryan Wingo. Lots of good ones. Mike Matthews, a guy from Parkview. He went to Parkview. He ends up going to Tennessee. Bryant Wesco goes to Clemson, right? There's a lot of really good pass catchers from this class, and they get Nitro Tuggle, who's not there anymore, and they get Sokovie White, who I actually think can make an impact, a former three-star, who I actually think can make an impact in Georgia's offense this coming year. But look, how different are things if they have a Jeremiah Smith or a Ryan Williams level talent? That's what it was. Just think back to a couple years ago from 21 to 23. You wonder, hey, man, Georgia doesn't have one of these. They had a Brock Bowers. They had one of those elite talents. You saw how different that can be. It makes a huge difference having somebody that good, that freaky on your offense. LSU 2019, great football team, obviously great quarterback, but what did they have? That was the thing that teams just really couldn't keep up with. They had Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. Two of the best receivers. They're now the two best receivers in the NFL. And they had them at the same time. Alabama was unstoppable in 2020. And what did they have? They had a Heisman winning receiver and a guy who just won the Super Bowl in Devontae Smith. 21, 22 Georgia, you had a Brock Bowers. You had a lot of other stuff, obviously, and all these teams did. But elite weapons. Ohio State won this year. Emeka Egbuka was a first-round pick. Jeremiah Smith's going to be a first-round pick in a couple of years. Look, I haven't seen Jeremiah Smith in person. I've seen Egbuka in person. But on TV, yeah, Jeremiah Smith's one of the most impressive freshman wide receivers you've ever seen. The same goes out for Ryan Williams. I've seen a good bit of really elite receivers. I've seen Marvin Harrison Jr. put up an elite performance against Georgia. I've seen Malik Neighbors, another one of the best receivers in the NFL, play really well. I've seen George Pickens. I've seen all sorts of guys. I've seen Cam Coleman. I've seen Ryan Williams. Ryan Williams arguably was the best one I saw. All right, with what he did to Georgia and the play he made to win that game. You can argue that was the most impressive performance. Marvin Harrison Jr.'s against Georgia is obviously up there. I think Malik Neighbors showed some real promise. But I've seen a lot of elite pass catchers, and these two that are freshmen are absolute game changers. And that is really Georgia was missing a lot of things in 2024, but missing someone that is just an absolute game changer on the outside, that's arguably the biggest thing that the Dogs were missing. Can you imagine how much easier Carson Beck's life would have been if he had an elite target last year? He had a reliable target last year. Because at the end of the day, these guys were dropping passes. The tight ends just kind of weren't existent in the offense. Specifically, Oscar Delp didn't make a real impact on the offense until November. Right? He had a really big play against Texas in October, but didn't start scoring and didn't start making those game-changing type of plays for the most part until November. You got Arian Smith dropping passes downfield. You got Dominic Levitt dropping screen passes. Dylan Bell's dropping. People drop passes, but it was a problem for Georgia. And Carson Beck starts pressing, and he starts throwing interceptions because of that. And that all has to do with the lack of offensive chemistry. Now, the lack of a run game also goes into that, but just plug in Jeremiah Smith or Ryan Williams or Ken Coleman or any of these really, really elite receivers in Georgia's offense last year. I think we're talking about a change. I think we're talking about maybe beating Alabama in that game. Seriously. Think about if Ryan Williams was on the other side. Does Alabama win that football game? I don't think so. I think Georgia does. Because they're taking downfield shots to him and they're not going up against it. It just goes to show you, I just think it's so important to have, it's such a premium position. It's a reason why it's one of the highest paid positions in football when you get to the professional level. Quarterbacks, left tackles, defensive edge rushers, wide receivers, those are kind of your premium positions, the ones that are making the big bucks. This is a funny what if. I don't know if Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith were ever considering Georgia in a serious level, but if they teamed up at Georgia, imagine how deadly that would have been. Thank you for watching.